सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
As he desperately tried to restart his stalled car, the young military doctor would have heard the speech being delivered to the Muslim Railway Employees Association near Quetta railway station. Followers of the Ahmadi faith, a frenzied cleric was proclaiming, were blasphemers, heretics who should be punished by death. Then, someone in the crowd noticed that Major Mahmood Ahmad had a short beard. That was enough. The doctor's body was found later, his lung cut through and his guts carved out of his body. Like so many thousands after it, the murder on the 11th of August 1948, Pakistan's very first blasphemy killing, remained unidentified and the case was filed untraced. There was Judges Muhammad Munir and M.R. Kayani acidly recorded in a later inquiry. Not even one person, and I quote, willing to take credit for this act of Islamic heroism. And out of a large number of persons who were eyewitnesses, none was able or willing to identify the Ghazis or holy warriors who were authors of this brave deed. As the 75th anniversary of Major Mahmood's murder passes unmentioned, unnoticed, the Pakistani state and Islamist groups continue to pursue his killer's project. Last month, a 22-year-old Christian, Noman Masih, was sentenced to death for failing to delete purportedly blasphemous cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad sent to him on WhatsApp by a Muslim friend who, by the way, has not been prosecuted. An 8-year-old Hindu boy faces the death penalty for urinating on the carpet of a madrasa library. It's not just Hindus and Christians. Anika Atiya, a 26-year-old Muslim woman, is also on death row on blasphemy charges. The scholar Muhammad Nafis has shown how blasphemy cases have surged over the decades, together with extrajudicial killings of purported blasphemers and heretics. How did Pakistan get here? 5 years after Major Mahmood's death in 1953, massive anti-Ahmadi riots tore through Pakistan. Led by the right-wing Majlis-e-Ehrar, the protests marked a determined attempt by Pakistan's clerics to take control of the political system. The collapse of the police in the face of these anti-Ahmadi communal riots compelled the government to proclaim martial law for the very first time. Even though clerics lost the battle to form the government, they emerged as significant political actors. Nobody could take the mullahs for granted any longer. The genesis of the conflict, though, lay even deeper in the intense competition between Hindu nationalists and Islamists that broke out across Punjab in the 1920s. The contestation, which was marked by bitter communal invective and abuse, as well as the first blasphemy murder in 1929, often erupted into riots. Even though the colonial penal code provided for the punishment of anyone who, and I quote, destroys, damages or defiles any place of worship or any object held sacred by any class of persons, fears mounted over the power of religious groups to incite violence. In 1927, the law was, despite some unease over the consequences, expanded to prescribe, and I quote, deliberate and malicious acts intended to outrage religious feelings. So now, it wasn't just damaging religious objects or shrines that was a crime, it was also hurting the feelings of believers. General Muhammad Ziaul Haq, who ruled Pakistan from 1977 until his death in 1988, expanded this power to punish religious offense. The most important of his reforms was Section 298C of the Pakistani Penal Code, which codified the death sentence for blasphemy. The law mandates that whoever, and I quote, by words either spoken or written, or by visible representation, or by any imputation, innuendo, or insinuation, directly or indirectly defiles the sacred name of the Holy Prophet Muhammad shall be punished with death or imprisonment for life. As you can tell, that's pretty sweeping language. The general's notorious Ordinance 20 or Ordinance XX, as you'll find it written sometimes, also institutionalized severe restrictions on the practice of the Ahmadi faith, conceding the demand made by the clerics back in 1953. Attacks on Ahmadi mosques and graveyards have continued unabated over the years. In one particularly bizarre example from 2014, the word Muslim was gouged out from an epitaph on the gravestone of the Nobel Prize winning physicist Abdus Salam, an Ahmadi. Now the epitaph bizarrely reads, the first Nobel laureate. Ever since the murder of Punjab Governor Salman Taseer in 2011, who was assassinated for opposing the blasphemy laws, it's been clear that God commands a not insubstantial vigilante army in Pakistan. Lawyers in Lahore showered rose petals on Taseer's assassin Mumtaz Qadri, and clerics have repeatedly hailed him as a martyr. The mausoleum for Qadri in Lahore's Miani Sahib graveyard draws enormous numbers of his supporters, and hagiographic accounts of his life are even taught in schools. And most important, no political party in Pakistan is willing to call for the repeal of the blasphemy laws. Taseer's killings followed his calls to reform those laws in the wake of a death sentence handed down to Asia Noreen. Noreen, a member of the only Christian family which lived in the Punjab village of Itawala, had been asked to fetch water for a group of women working in the fields. Some of those women refused to accept the water because of Asia Noreen's low caste, and an argument broke out. Local clerics said Noreen had blasphemed against the Prophet. Taseer, who met her in prison, concluded that the charge had been brought to hide the fact that she had been beaten and gang raped for having argued with the people of a higher caste. The assassination of Taseer illustrated deep ambiguities in the Pakistani elite's relationship with religion. Taseer's own father, the left-wing poet Muhammad Din Taseer, had marched in the funeral procession of the 1929 blasphemy murderer Ilmdeen, the very first, you'll recall I told you. Even though historical documents show the 19-year-old killer may have been actually driven by psychological problems, including a dysfunctional homoerotic fixation, rather than any religious ideology, the complexities of the case are rarely discussed except by historians. Following Taseer's killing, Minorities Affairs Minister Shahbaz Bhatti was also murdered for helping to provide Noreen with a legal defense. Bhatti's assassin, the Tehreek-e-Taliban jihadist Hamad Adil, was a member of a very affluent family and the brother of a senior police officer. That's again in a little insight into how deep roots the blasphemy movement has grown in Pakistan. The prosecutions have continued, often with a slightly surreal tinge. A 17-year-old schoolboy was prosecuted for doodling supposedly blasphemous remarks on a corner of his examination paper. A doctor threw into the dustbin the business card of a pharmaceutical salesman whose first name was the same as that of the Prophet, and he ended up facing a blasphemy trial. In another case, a Muslim cleric and his son were sentenced to prison for tearing down posters with the name of the Prophet upon them. Jihadists and mobs have sometimes overruled judicial verdicts by force. In one 2021 case, a police officer murdered the Lahore resident Muhammad Waqas after a judge acquitted him of blasphemy charges. In other cases, mobs have punished those they believe to be guilty even before a trial could begin, just as Major Mahmood was slaughtered in 1948. An American citizen was killed on blasphemy charges, with Tahir Naseem being shot inside the court hearing his case. The only people with some degree of immunity against blasphemy charges, interestingly, seem to be Chinese nationals, whom the Pakistan government goes out of its way to protect in the face of such threats. Like so much to do with ideology, Pakistan's anti-blasphemy laws are contested. London-based author Ziauddin Sardar, among others, has noted that the Quran has no notion of blasphemy. The concept of blasphemy itself, Ziauddin argues, was introduced by rulers in the 8th century who used it as a tool to punish their political opponents. There is no will in Pakistan, though, to engage in that fraught debate. The blasphemy laws demonstrate that real power lies with the clerics, not with the political system, the state, or even the army. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm National Security Editor of ThePrint. Thank you again for watching Security Code.